Chicken. Spoiler season. It's everyone's favorite thing, apparently, at least if the numbers on the channel are anything to go by. It's the only time anybody watches the channel. On that note, welcome back. Yes, I've lost even more hair since the last time you saw me. I think we all have acknowledged this one line of hair up here where I just don't get to have hair anymore. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about some spurlers, some spiolers today. Or previews, I guess, if you want to be weird about it. But yeah, Wizards done gone and gave us 7 new Planeswalkers to look at from Phyrexia, All Will Be One, or Pawbo. Silly word. But yeah, that's what we're here to do today on the eve of preview season. We're going to check out the 7 Planeswalkers that Wizards has previewed so far from this set. We're going to rank them in order. We're going to give them a little score. It's going to be super fun. But first, remember to subscribe to the channel because it's preview season. All right, that part's over. Let's talk about some Planeswalkers, and one of them has to be first, even if it's the one that I kind of like the most in terms of the character and how cool I think they are, and they look awesome and all that stuff. But there's still, I still have to try to be as objective as possible, and so that means that we got to talk about Kaya first. Let's see if she can take us higher. That mana cost definitely can. It's a lot, guys. It's 3, 2 white, and 2 black for a Planeswalker. That's 7 mana. So she better do something awesome. Let's take a read. Kaya, Intangible Slayer, is a 6 loyalty Planeswalker with hexproof. +2. Each opponent loses 3 life, and you gain 3 life. 0. You draw 2 cards. Then each opponent may scry 1. -3. Exile target creature or enchantment. If it wasn't an aura, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 white spirit creature with flying, in addition to its other types. You can tell they playtested this one, everybody. They slapped if it wasn't an aura on there because they realized that would be a nightmare. Now, I will say that you can just invoke Justice this onto the table on like turn 5, put a bunch of counters on your boys, that feels good, and then you have a big Planeswalker. You have a 6 loyalty Planeswalker that might go up. Might stay the same, who knows? But I think that a lot of time when you slam loyalty, when you slam Kaya on the table there, whether you're reanimating or with the Invoke Justice, or you're actually paying the full 7 mana, just casting her out of your hand, you're probably going to be racing to that -3 ability. Almost certainly. It's a cool -3 too. She protects herself in 2 ways. She does 2 things on a lot of her modes, right? Like she draws 2 cards. So she replaces herself twice because you paid 7 mana for her. So if your opponent can somehow kill her, they can't target her with anything, but if they can like swing into her and kill her, then you still got 2 cards off of it. But your opponent also scryed 1. Why am I paying 7 mana for my opponent to scry 1? That's a little weird. But the minus ability like cheekily does 2 things to protect her, right? Like she gets rid of a thing that's on the table, but also makes a blocker for in case you left anything behind, and it's 7 mana. You probably left something behind when you removed 1 thing. It's just a lot. Like she's not Ugin the Spirit Dragon. The real danger eventually with Ugin when they eventually land it and they just minus whatever they minus. The real problem after that is that now you have to deal with Ugin plussing like every turn and bolting something, right? Well, Kaya can't like bolt a creature off the table or anything, but she can just pressure your opponent's life total every turn and gain you life every turn. So 2-3 turns of this, it's probably pretty hard to come back from that. Like, not only because you're losing the life, but also because your opponent has gained like 6 or 9 life over the course of a couple of turns. And if you can't remove the Kaya, which is kind of tough to do if you don't have any dudes, right? Because you can't just remove it with Fateful Absence or something, then suddenly she becomes a real problem. Like there's actual inevitability on this. She's relatively difficult to kill. She's great after like a sweeper. Anytime the board is relatively clean, you land that Kaya and your opponent doesn't really have a way to deal with it. And then suddenly they're taking 3 every turn. You're gaining your life back. It feels probably good, and then eventually if your hand runs dry you can just draw more cards. Who cares? So sweet little thing. And like once you start plussing her, the game gets even more out of reach because if your opponent does land a threat, you can just minus her for a turn. Like really sweet Planeswalker once she's on the table. But like that's the thing, getting her on the table is like a whole thing. I don't know, we'll try it. I have some hopes for her. I think like a 1 of Kaya, like a control deck, like possibly, but I'm just not super sold on it as much as I want to be, and as ridiculous as she is when she's out, you know, 7 mana is a lot of mana. I'll start the number grading gimmick here by giving Kaya a 6 1/4, which is still like playable, but like pretty niche playable, right? Maybe a 1 of, again, a 1 of in certain decks. Maybe if the Reanimator deck is a thing, but it hasn't been, even though it's got like ridiculous, it's got like Titan of Industry and Portal Phyrexia, and it still isn't a thing. Mostly because like Graveyard Trespasser, Corpse Appraiser, Unlicensed Hearse, Farewell, there's like so many things that mess with graveyards. They're like, I'm not sure that that's the right way to do things, but there is a black-white Planeswalker sort of shieldred thing in the format right now that plays like Wandering Emperor, Elspeth, and a couple of things. So I could see it again adding like a 1 of Kaya, but That's probably about it. So 6 1/4, again, playable along certain lines. But hey, let's take a Luca this next Planeswalker. It's Luca. So let's take a look at Luca here. This is Luca Bound to Ruin. 5 mana, 2 red, green, and then a Phyrexian hybrid red-green. This is a 5 loyalty Planeswalker with completed. You can +1 Luca to add red-green. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. You can -1 Luke to create a 3/3 green Phyrexian beast creature token with Toxic 1. -4 Uncle Luke to deal X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or Planeswalkers, where X is the greatest power among creatures you controlled as you activated this ability. So there's kind of a lot I like about this Luca, but I just don't know where it goes in any format, right? Like for Kaya, I was mostly talking about standard. I don't think there's anywhere else you want to play the card, but who knows? But with this one, I'm mostly talking about standard too, because I just don't know that it's like a commander or modern or maybe cubable. Who knows? Just throw in the Planeswalker cube we're working on. But anyway, it's a cool card. It does a lot of interesting things. You know, if you do play or pay completed mana for it, you can't use the -4 when it hits the table, which is kind of not great. It's not super good at all. But at that point, you're paying 4 mana. You're paying a couple of life, but you're paying 4 mana for a 3/3 and a 2 loyalty Planeswalker. Very likely is what you do with that. Now, you might pay 4 mana for it, immediately plus it, fire up a creature or something like that to block for it. I really do like the mana generation ability on this. I think that for 4 mana, you kind of get like an explosive vegetation, something like that. You know, like something that for 4 mana ramps you by 2. So the next turn, you can have 7 mana available to you, which is actually pretty cool. So I like that about Luca, and like a green-red ramp deck or a green-red X ramp deck, but there just really hasn't been one of those in the format. A little bit more on that later. We'll bring it up again. But again, I'm just not really sure what this goes in, despite the fact that like the abilities are cool. It has a removal ability and a creature generation ability and a mana generation ability that are all cool, useful abilities, depending on what you're doing in the game. So I also like the way the last ability is worded. Like your opponent, you can't activate the ability and then like kill a thing to screw up your math or something. You can't do that. It also divides damage. So like if say you have like a 3/3, which is pretty easy. He makes 3/3s, but let's just say you have a 3/3. Well, you're just casting Arc Lightning, which is like not terrible. You know, a magic missile, whatever version of this card you want to call it. 3 damage divided as you choose can sometimes kill 2 guys, which is like great, you know, especially if you're trying to protect Luca. So I kind of like this. I think that in terms of standard, it has some interesting applications. Not too expensive to play, especially with Phyrexian mana. But if you do play with Phyrexian mana, it's a little lame the first turn it's out, but still. 4 mana for a 3/3 and a 2 loyalty Planeswalker, you could do worse. But 4 mana on turn 4 in standard is Shieldred, and that's a 3/3 and a Planeswalker is not good enough. So I'm just not too sold on Luca, but I do think there's some really cool stuff this Planeswalker does, even if it is just kind of like baseline. But hey, sometimes baseline is good. You need normal things sometimes to get you through games, but I'm not super impressed by it. We're going to give Luca a 6.5. Speaking of a Planeswalker that just kind of does normal things, but this one I like even more. Let's look at Braska, my other favorite Planeswalker in terms of like the character or whatever in this bunch, but she also is not amazing. But I like Braska. Let's take a look here at Braska. What's her actual name here? I don't know because I've loaded a different page on my phone. All right, it's Braska Betrayal's Sting. This is 6 mana, 4 a black, and a Phyrexian black mana for a 6 loyalty Planeswalker with completed. 0. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. Proliferate. -2. Target creature becomes a treasure artifact. With tap, sacrifice this artifact, you know what treasure does. -9. If target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. So is it Loth? Is it Oko? Who knows? You know, I've seen people say the treasure ability is like a fixed Oko ability. I think it's like way better than that. I mean, you're giving your opponent ramp, and you paid 5 or 6 mana for your Planeswalker, and the removal ability ramps them, which is not ideal, I think. But what you're still getting out of this is kind of, again, Loth's ability in a way, except it actually puts loyalty on the Planeswalker. This is just like a fundamentally normal Planeswalker. Like one ability draws cards, the other ability, you know, removes creatures. And the last ability is an ultimate that you probably don't care about, like ever. I like the fact that no matter if you know, Phyrexian mana'd or whatever, if you completed it or not, then you get to use the removal ability a number of times, and more than one time, you know. If you completed it for 5 mana, you get to -2 it and then -2 it again to destroy something else. That's cool. I mean, not the same turn, obviously, but the ability to do it twice is cool. And if you pay 6 mana for it, you can effectively get 3 things off the table, given that you can protect her for those turns. So that's actually kind of sweet. I like the versatility on the casting cost, as I do with like pretty much every Phyrexian mana thing, but still, you know, this is one of those few that if you complete it, it still comes into play with like a decent amount of loyalty, and it can go up to like 5 that turn, which is pretty cool. So yeah, Braska's doing an okay job here, and I don't know if I expect her to show up too much in Standard or anything, especially considering she's in the same slot as like Invoke Despair, you know. But I guess you can Invoke and then drop a swamp, an island. You drop a swamp on the next turn and then immediately drop Braska. Or if you don't draw the swamp, you can still pay 5 mana for your Braska. Seems okay. So I don't know, maybe again like a 1 or 2 of in these mono black decks, but I don't know where else she actually goes. But there might be like an Esper Super Friends deck, because obviously Proliferate goes pretty well with other Planeswalkers, you know. So, like an Esper Super Friends deck. Oh, with Teferi, that makes sense. The new Teferi makes creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them. So Proliferate, you get counters on Braska and Teferi and the dog from Teferi. No, the Mordenkainen makes dogs. Teferi just makes like a guy. I don't remember. But anyway, yeah, so there's some cool like Super Friends applications and stuff, but ultimately I'm not sure that Braska is good enough to like break the mold of what's happening in Standard right now. But it's a solid Planeswalker that we will give a 6.75 as you begin to notice a pattern. But up next, it's Taivar. I really didn't like this guy at first. And then I got to thinking. It turns out thinking is important, important thing to do. Let's look at Taivar. He's a brawler, a jubilant brawler. 3 mana, 1 a black and a green for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. A little one-sided concordant crossroad, which is kind of cool. You can +1 ties to untap up to 1 target creature, or you can -2 Taivar to mill 3 cards. Then you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this guy I kind of talked myself into. His abilities are, well, one of his abilities at least a little bit lame. You know, it's a way of protecting himself that he can untap a guy and that guy can block. It's interesting, you know, and he's really good obviously with mana dorks. He double times mana dorks. You know, I cast a mana guy, I can immediately tap it for mana. I can use Taivar to untap that guy, get more mana. It's really, really neat, especially in like, I don't know, Elves EDH decks and stuff like that. You untap your Well-Wisher or untap a guy that produces 1,000,000 Priest of Titania or something like that. So cool, you know, there's probably awesome applications there, and like his minus ability can basically get like every important elf back, so that's nice. I like it there, but in Standard, I like it too. You know, there's a lot of really important 2-drop creatures in Standard alone, but also in Modern and beyond, you know, Explorer, Historic, Pioneer, and stuff. I think that this probably gets a little bit better the farther you go back, just because there's so many cool 2-drops that you can hit with it. So I like that, but in Standard, especially, I have to talk about the thing that made me bump this card up a little bit, and that is obviously these self-mill decks, you know, like things that play Urborg Lurgoyf, and they play old Stick Fingers, right? These are 2 like my favorite, especially Stick Fingers, you know, it's one of my favorite cards in Standard. And this card is really good in that deck because it mills you. That's the thing that you want. The thing is, it's not a creature, and that deck wants a bunch of creatures in its yard. It can't play too many cards that aren't creatures. So that's a consideration, but still, this brings back everything important in the entire deck, you know, Stick Fingers or Lurgoyf, all of your mana dorks and stuff, and then makes your mana dorks tap for more mana. If you want to, you can play Deathbloom Ritualist in that deck now. I wasn't doing it before, but Taivar makes me want to do it. Can't bring back a Ritualist, but what it can do is make Ritualist tap with haste the turn that you play it, which is great, and also untap Ritualist to tap for, I don't know, 40 mana in 1 turn. So it seems great if you have like a way to dump that. So that deck's coming together, and a lot of it's because of Taivar, but this does work in other formats with other creatures and stuff like that. Just that's a super versatile ability to have on a Planeswalker, and you get your best 2-drop, the best 2-drop you can think of, and also a Planeswalker. So just a sick little card here, and I'm not sure how great it really is, but if you can break that -2, then I'm pretty sure it's amazing, and it doesn't seem too hard to do. Sweet little card that I will give a solid 7 to. I think this actually could see play in multiple formats, even if it's just, you know, the CEDH Elves deck or something. It could, yeah, I said CEDH, it could totally happen. So I think the card is sweet, and I like it. But let's move on to another green Planeswalker. Did she get completed? She did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody. Nissa Done got completed, but we got a pretty sweet Planeswalker out of it, so let's take a look real quick, I guess, at Nissa, Ascended Animist. This is 7 mana, 3, 2 green, and then 2 completions that are green for a 7 loyalty Planeswalker with completed. +1. Create an XX green Phyrexian horror creature token where X is Nissa Ascended Animist loyalty. -1. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. -7. Until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample. Okay, so if you pay 5 mana for her, she has 3 loyalty. Now, if you can pay 6 mana for her, that's something you can do, then she has 5 loyalty, and that's kind of nice. So, again, I kind of like the versatility and the casting cost on this. Kind of goes without saying on completed Planeswalkers, but I like it even more than usual for a card like this. And this just does, and look at all the things, you know? Like, my first thought is that this is kind of comparable to like a Wrenn and 7. And it is. It still is, you know? Like, you can plunk it down whenever you decide to do that. Whatever mana you have, I guess. You got 3 mana? We'll make it work. Or like a Kia dealership. You have terrible credit? You'll drive something off a lot. Anyway, no matter what you got, you're going to get this Planeswalker down and make a creature, right? So all your opponent then has to do is kill the creature with a removal spell or something and then attack the Nissa. It's the exact same way you deal with Wrenn and 7. There's a couple of problems with that, I guess, in that, like, if you plunk down Wrenn and 7, it goes to -2 when you make a guy, and your opponent's like much more likely to be able to kill the guy and just kill your Nissa, kill your Wrenn and 7 because it's only got 2 loyalty. Nissa is at least going to be like 4 loyalty. Again, at least going to be 4 loyalty. So it's a little bit harder for them to just like kill the dude and then attack her down. So that's probably going to matter. If you can untap with a Nissa in play, I feel like she's like way like ridiculously better. So, you know, even if all you do is +1 her every turn, she's obviously like unbelievable. So there's that, you know. But her other abilities, not bad either. I'd say the -1 makes her more worth playing than a card like Wrenn and 7 just in and of itself, you know. If you have to pay 5 mana and 4 life and a loyalty counter to destroy target thing or whatever, that's kind of a pretty steep cost, but there are going to be times where you are more than happy paying that to get rid of that thing. And the ultimate, this is easily, I think, the most like impactful ultimate of the day, technically. Like the most impactful traditional ultimate. It costs like a bunch of loyalty. We've seen people pay 7 mana for Titan of Industry and not even really like ramp into it. So I just don't think it would be unfeasible or anything to pay all 7 mana for Nissa and just kind of immediately win the game. This is a never-ending creature factory that pluses to make creatures, also interacts with your opponent's side of the table, gets rid of pesky permanent types, and also wins the game relatively easily. I mean, in Ultimates, the turn it comes down if you pay the full price for it. So this is actually, I think, a pretty good Planeswalker. I'm not sure if it sees like really much play outside of Standard, to be honest with you, but in that format, I have to give it like a 7.5, a pretty big jump from the last score, but I really think that it's getting very close to that level. Only a couple of Planeswalkers left. I wonder what's next. That's right. It's the Eternal Wanderer, a 6 mana Planeswalker. But this one, I think, very much worth it. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 white for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker that no more than 1 creature can attack each combat. Only one thing can attack this Planeswalker every combat. +1. Exile up to 1 target artifact or creature. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. 0. Create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike. -4. For each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control, not chosen this way. All right, so this looks relatively impossible to kill. And it's a, again, never-ending creature factory that kind of makes 4/4s, and if they get bigger, that's pretty awesome. A lot of ways in a mono white deck to make them bigger, whether it's the other Wanderer, Elspeth, whatever. There's a million. I just list them all. But anyway, there's plenty of ways to make a double strike guy bigger in white deck. Aside from that, it's not only got that going for it, it also blinks opponents' creatures to where they can't attack next turn, which is kind of hot, but it does kind of run the same risk of you know, the Wrenn and 7 problem I was discussing earlier, where if you plunk this down and immediately -4 it, maybe you get a creature, maybe your opponent gets to keep a creature. All your opponent has to do at that point is kill your guy with a removal spell, tack down the Wanderer, problem solved. So if you do immediately use it as a reset button, that's when it's at its most vulnerable. But I guess that kind of makes sense in terms of like how much power it would take a wizard to do certain things. Whatever, we'll get into the lore of it, but it's an interesting video idea. I could see this being this like huge headache to deal with. And I know I went on forever about how Kaya costs 7. This costs 6. That's a world of difference from 7 mana. It's just a huge difference. People already play like Sanctuary Warden in the 6-drop slot of like mono white and stuff, but I definitely think this makes its way in some way or another, whether you get rid of a copy or two of Sanctuary Warden or you just go ahead and slot this in on top of them somehow. This will not only protect you by blinking creatures until the next, end step, or until their next end step. It's important wording to know. But this can also like blink Reckoner Bankbuster and put all of its counters back on it, so you can draw more cards and stuff. Seems ridiculous. Seems really, really good. And obviously you can blink Sanctuary Wardens. You can draw more cards, put more shield counters on it, or whatever you need to do at the time. It seems very good in a lot of different scenarios. Just having a Planeswalker that is a panic button, like it's a sweeper in and of itself. But also a creature factory, so if it survives the turn after it sweeps, it can start making dudes to protect it or sort of get in or whatever, depending on the board state. That also resets your guys. Just so many, it does so many things, and it can't really be attacked into well. So I think it's well worth the 6 mana, and there's a deck that this does slot into, which is not really the case for a lot of the other Planeswalkers we've looked at so far. So I think that gets it some points too. I'm going to give this thing a 7.5 too. I think it's a more than solid Planeswalker that probably ends up seeing some standard play. But if you're doing the math, there's one more Planeswalker to talk about, and it's Nahiri. I didn't expect her to be number 1. I really didn't. I had to be talked into this one, but multiple people did talk me into this one, and I'm starting to think maybe it's better than I thought it was at first. So let's take a look at Nahiri real quick. This is 4 mana, 1 a red and a white, and also a Phyrexian red-white hybrid. It's just hard to say. But anyway, if you can she has 5 loyalty, by the way. You can +1 Nahiri until your next turn. Up to 1 target creature attacks a player each combat if able. +1, discard a card, then draw a card. On the 0 ultimate here, exile target creature or equipment card with mana value less than Nahiri's loyalty from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it. That token gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So cool things about this Planeswalker. First of all, you can play her for 3 mana. I forgot to mention this with Taivar, but just being a 3 mana Planeswalker kind of gets you some points in my book, but you have to actually be good. Taivar is not always great when you play him on turn 3. Like, your 3-drop actually has to do something, especially in a world of 3-drops that do incredible things. Like Standard has just a glut of crazy 3-drops, so you got to really stand out. And I think this one kind of does the job, and not just in Standard. I think this is another one that looks pretty decent in Historic, Pioneer, possibly Modern even, for some of the same reasons I thought Taivar did. If you complete this, it comes in with 3 loyalties, so the way its ability is worded, it doesn't say equal to or less than, it's just less than her loyalty, so you get a 2-drop guy out of your graveyard, and you exile at the beginning of the next step, end step, which is poopy. It's the worst thing about the ability. You can also get equipments with it, which is lame. I'm just not thinking of too many equipments that I want to do that with, but maybe a Lizard Blades. If you plus her just once or twice, she starts being able to get like real stuff out of your yard. I can see it being good in the Invoke Justice deck that already wants to reanimate stuff. This is just another thing that can reanimate stuff. It can pitch stuff that you can later get with Invoke Justice. But once you get down to no cards in your hand, that just basically reads, 0, draw a card, which is sweet. Interesting abilities. I think her +1 is kind of poopy, to be honest. A lot of people are pointing out like, oh, it's a very interesting way of protecting herself. I just did the same thing, but yeah, it might be that. But I also don't think it's a very good way of protecting herself, if I'm being quite honest with you. So there's that. I think that's not good. But versatile in the casting cost, can be a 3-mana Planeswalker. Never-ending reanimation thing that reanimates something every turn at no cost. That's pretty. That's just, can I sell it to you like that? Are you buying the Kia yet? I just think this could see play in a pretty decent spread of formats and be breakable. A card like Nissa, even, a card like Braska or the Wanderer. These are reliable, dependable Planeswalkers that do normal, cool stuff that you need to do over the course of a game. But this is actually breakable, which I think, again, gives it some points. So I'm going to go ahead and give Nahiri a 7.75. It's actually a really high score for this video. Note that you have to be a ridiculously good card to get an 8 from me. But yeah, that's it. Let me know what your opinions on this one are, because I'm pretty sure people will have them. Opinions. People really have taken sides with these. Every time I see a new one of these get debuted on Twitter or something, I see people like, this is my favorite one so far. And it's like Taivar, it's Luca. And I'm like, oh, okay. Let's talk that out. Let's talk that out in the comments section. What are your favorites? What would your order be if you had to do this video, whatever. So do that, and also subscribe. Just do one more time. Can I ask you to subscribe? Maybe hit the bell for the notifications if you feel like it. Like the video, do the YouTube stuff on your way out. And the things. There's going to be a bunch of spoiler content. We also we have to do the I spend $5 on Dominaria Remastered video. We have to do that. I've ordered it. The cart's ready. I've got the screenshots and all that. The video's ready to go. I just have to actually like record it and edit it and stuff. So look for that maybe this weekend or something. And spoiler season all week. We're going to be getting on stream to do spoilers, I think on Thursday. So going to be a whole party. Make sure you're subbed to the content and do the stuff. Patreon also if you want to. Links in the description for things. But anyway, that's all I got for this one. So I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.